Bonjour et bienvenue. Welcome, everyone. I recognize that we are all joining the webinar from different geographical areas across the beautiful province of Ontario. I would like to acknowledge the heritage of the land where I am sitting at the present moment. And as I do, I invite you to reflect on your own understanding and the personal connections that you have to the place where you are now, so that together we can honor the lands from which we are joining this evening. I am joining you from the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Tonight, I think about the Indigenous peoples who cared for this land long before the arrival of the settlers and who continue to care for this land today. As part of my action towards reconciliation, I am learning about Treaty 14, which includes the land along the north shore of Lake Ontario, from where I am hosting the webinar this evening. Alors, bonjour et bienvenue. Weaving the Strands marks the third and final phase of the FSL Teacher Recruitment and Retention Project. The series consists of 4 modules, and each of those modules corresponds to one of the strands of the FSL curriculum. Last week, we began with listening, and we continue our journey through the strands of the curriculum with speaking. Tonight's webinar is therefore the second of this series and is intended to support FSL educators across the province to build the confidence and communicative competencies of language learners by using high-yield, low-risk strategies. Module 2 explores how to equip language learners to engage in accountable, productive talk so that they can become more confident as French speakers and so that they better understand how French is used to communicate. My name is Erin Colson, a modern learning resource teacher from the Peel District School Board, and I am also fortunate to serve as the Director of Membership for the OMLTA. I am one of 2 facilitators this evening. Joining me tonight is the ever awesome Kathy Irvine, an FSL itinerant teacher from the Halton Catholic District School Board, and you'll see her waving there if you've got your cameras open. And behind the scenes, as you saw, is Jordan Sloan. As questions come to mind, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A, and Jordan will answer them as best she can or flag them for conversation later on this evening. So we would like to begin by finding out who is in the room. And to do that, we are going to invite you to let us know that you are here by visiting Mentimeter. You can access Mentimeter at www.mentimeter.com. And if you look to the chat, Jordan will go ahead and she will put the link to Mentimeter in the chat. And Jordan will also go ahead and pop the join code. To access Mentimeter, you're going to need that join code. And we're going to give you a moment to connect to let us know who is in the room this evening. And I can see that the answers are starting to come in. So I'll give you a few more moments to let us know who is with us this evening. And as those answers continue to come in, I'm just going to pop on over to the live view of Mentimeter so that you can get a sense of who is joining us this evening. So we can see, Kathy, that we have predominantly core French educators with us this evening. And we also have some French immersion educators and a couple of FSL coordinators, consultants, or resource supports. So we welcome you this evening, and we look forward to hearing about your experiences with speaking in the FSL learning environment. All right, heading back over into our slide deck, we are going to move on to our next slide. And on this slide, you're going to learn a little bit more about the FSL Teacher Recruitment Project. So as you may be aware, 3 modules were developed. Initially, in that first phase, they consisted of content like establishing and maintaining a positive classroom environment, engaging the learner by planning for and implementing authentic tasks and the universal design for learning model, using assessment and evaluation within the FSL context. So that was the first phase. And if some of those topics spark an interest, you can learn more by revisiting those modules, viewers' guides, and videos, which can be found through omlta.org. In the second phase, which was released last year, and which went by the name Dare to Unmute FSL, additional modules were developed. There was a module around exploring equity, diversity, and intercultural awareness through the cultural component of the curriculum. There was a model featuring instructional practices and innovation in the in-person, hybrid, and virtual settings. And finally, there was a third model around developing dynamic action-oriented tasks that meet the needs of all learners. And again, if any of those modules from the second phase are of interest, you can access those through omlta.org. And again, there's a series of learning modules, viewers' guides, and videos to support that work. And that brings us to now, 2022. And this year, 4 additional modules were developed. And we encourage you, if you haven't yet had the opportunity to explore any of those phases, to visit omlta.org. And in that way, you can access any of the videos, viewers' guides, and supports that were created for the modules over the past couple of years. Weaving the Strands offers an adult learning model. And within that adult learning model, you'll notice that there are 4 pathways to explore speaking. There's the at a glance section, and the at a glance section focuses on, the main ideas of the module, what we might call those big ticket items. The closer look section takes you to direct slides that provide a more thorough breakdown of each of the big ideas in the module. There is a video pathway. That pathway provides an audio-visual experience, and there are opportunities for pausing the video and engaging in reflective learning, given the prompts that are embedded within the video. And finally, there is tonight's webinar, which will provide interactive opportunities and a highlight of some of those key concepts from the module. So the goals for Module 2 are shown on the screen. Within the module, we explore strategies to support purposeful and productive talk and enhance learners' speaking productions. We develop an awareness of aspects of culture in diverse French-speaking communities. We look at ways to reduce barriers to learning, build learner confidence, and develop those communicative competencies through asset-based anti-oppressive approaches to learning as well as to assessment. Finally, we demonstrate how to center students through inclusive instructional strategies and culturally relevant pedagogy. We invite you to take a look at the quote on the screen. Have you ever felt that your French wasn't good enough? Have you ever hesitated to speak in French or share that you're able to speak in French because of your accent or your vocabulary or your fluency. Here we see a quote from an assistant professor of language from the University of British Columbia. He reminds us that linguistic insecurity is reinforced through the constant monitoring and correction of the language by those who claim to speak a better French, the right kind of French, the real French. Feeling confident about one's use of a first, second, or additional language has a direct effect on whether, with whom, and how one chooses to use these languages. So as you are selecting various teaching materials, we need to remember that we have the professional obligation to disrupt colonial practices, to disrupt oppressive stereotypes, and to design brave and inclusive spaces for all of the learners that we teach. We would like to get a sense of the strategies that you use in your classroom to disrupt this idea of linguistic insecurity and to build confidence with your students. What we're going to do is we're going to invite you to share your ideas in an interactive manner. In just a minute, I'm going to ask you to open a Google Doc, and this is a shared document. In that document, you're going to see that there are a couple of different sections that correspond with your role. We have a section for new to FSL educators. We have a section for core French, extended French, and immersion educators across the panels. We have a section for support staff and a section for administrators. We invite you to consider your current role and to find the section that most closely matches your current role. In the text box, we invite you to answer the following prompt. What strategies do you use in your classroom to promote speaking? Now, if you're in a support role, like some of the resource teachers or administrators that indicated that they're joining us, we'd invite you to think about that a little bit differently and instead think about the strategies that you might use to build a culture of language confidence in your buildings. And so I'm going to pop this link in the Q&A, the chat, and I'm going to invite you to take maybe 4 to 5 minutes to consider the question and to add your ideas to the document. When we come back together, we're going to take a look at the ideas that as a group we have generated around the kinds of strategies that are working in classrooms across Ontario to promote speaking. All right, I'm going to invite folks to come back to the large group. Thank you so much for all of the wonderful ideas that we can see. We've really got a fulsome list of instructional strategies here and methods to encourage speaking. Kathy, I'm going to have you just take a look and let me know, do you see any ideas there that really struck you when you were looking through the document?
Honestly, I think you guys are wonderful, and you guys should be, some of you should be sharing and leading this webinar this evening, because the ideas in here, I think, touch on all learners. There's ones for small group, there's a large group, there's ones with technology, there's ones that are repetitive, all that are tried, tested, and true, and definitely things that we would want to use. I love the idea. I see a few times modeled in here about chat mats and show. These are things that always agree with the students. They get motivated and excited by these things, which then in turn would allow and promote the speaking in the classroom.
Yeah, I think there's really a fulsome list here of encouraging and inspiring activities. I especially love the piece about honoring learner variability. For instance, if students are uncomfortable in front of the class, how do we honor their passion and interest for engaging in a way that works for them, and asking students what they're interested in speaking about. So really centering the learning around student interests, student passions, and the various ways that they can represent their understanding of concepts. Fantastic. So I'm going to pop back into the main, I'm going to pop back into the main deck, and I'd encourage you to continue adding to those lists. I think what we've done is we've compiled a really fulsome list that we can reference in future in regards to various models of learning and instructional strategies in the class. Over to you, Kathy.
Well, thank you, Erin, for all of your slides that you presented, and to all of our participants for your responses and your engagement thus far. It's very much appreciated for all of us. As you guys can all see on the slides now, we have pictured here and linked all of the ministry resources that are available to support FSL educators. Within these documents, they also reference CEFR inspired strategies to integrate speaking meaningfully within all of our language programs. As educators, we set the context for language acquisition. It is important to plan tasks that allow learners to apply their knowledge and skills in an authentic context. Transforming FSL, for example, reminds educators that vocabulary and language structures must be scaffolded as needed to support meaningful communication. Regular opportunities for teacher to student, student to student, and spontaneous interaction are essential in order to build learner competence and confidence. In a French classroom, we're constantly striving to look for multiple opportunities to allow our learners to practice their speaking. Small group interactions are one of the many resources and tools we can use, and they provide multiple opportunities for learners to be able to speak in a more comfortable and relaxed environment. When learning a second language, learners are very nervous to speak, and many learners find the size of a small group environment more comforting. We have a few videos and examples here of students involved in small group interactions. A few of the examples, and this was not as many as you all put on your document just a few moments ago, but these were some that we had highlighted. And on the first one you can see is flashcards. And flashcards can be purchased, they can be created, they can be virtual. And I find that learners are quite creative with their flashcards. They play memory, they alphabetize them, they time each other trying to accomplish these tasks. A great tip for flashcards that I've had through the years is laminating so they can survive wear and tear, as well as actually magnetizing them so that the learners can manipulate them in many of our vertical learning spaces. Here's an example of some students using their flashcards in the classroom. You can see in that video that one student was using her flashcards within her book and asking questions about the others, while another group beside even had them on the board that they were using. And the class is loud and noisy. These videos are authentic from the classrooms, which is what you actually want your students to be doing because they're all speaking. Our second example of a small group interaction that promotes speaking within the classroom is the playing of games. In this case, it's specific to playing cards. Playing cards is something learners are familiar with and enjoy outside of the school setting. And as a group, learners and educators can brainstorm what vocabulary would be required to play the game and provide learners with multiple opportunities to play and practice this vocabulary. This play ultimately then becomes engaged speaking practice. In the video you're going to see here where they're playing, these students have taken it to a next level where they're actually arguing about what's going on in the game. The girls in that video were arguing about whose turn it was. I know it's hard to hear with the background noise, but we were trying to make the videos as authentic as possible. Another example of a small group interaction is our toys. Toys are an amazing opportunity for our learners to continue their speaking. Examples of toys can include Lego, stuffed animals, doctor kits. Learners love being able to be given the opportunity to bring in their own toys from home also, and the chance to play with their toys, but this time the play is in French. Highlighted in their pictures there, you can see one student there playing with the toy of a restaurant, where the students below are actually playing with pretend food. These videos we're not going to show, but you're welcome to look at them on your own time also. And in the fourth video, we do have example of learning prompts. And in this example, particularly, we have the cootie catcher. These are great examples of sentence starters. And in cootie catchers, the students are speaking to each other, they're switching roles, and then listening for responses. I know there were quite a few examples in there, but in the chat, do feel free to ask questions, to provide feedback, and almost what did you notice about these videos? What did you wonder? What would you like to see more of? I'll offer you 2 minutes to provide some feedback within the chat, reactions, comments, anything that you have about these so far.
And Kathy, while we're waiting for answers to come in the chat about what folks noticed and wondered while watching those videos, there are some questions that have come up that perhaps we can address while folks are adding their voice to the chat. And the first one was, can you elaborate on chat mats? They saw that your face lit up when you were speaking about them. Can you describe in a little bit more detail how you might use a chat mat to encourage authentic speaking?
Yes, a chat mat in my class, and chat mats I know can take on various forms depending on the grade, the age, the program of French that you're teaching in. But a chat mat is created by the class, by the students, with the guidance of the teacher, and then therefore practiced afterwards. You could see, I don't have an example of a chat mat here with me, but you could see just in the little picture of the students that are playing the game, their vocabulaire pour les jeux, like where they were playing the cards, that is their card chat mat or their game. And we categorized the whole paper into words that you would need to ask questions, vocab words for the game. The bottom corner, we had, asking questions within the game. Whose turn is it? Didn't you miss a turn? And we organized it so the students know which part of their mat, or it's in actually their page, where they could go to find the vocabulary needed to play the game or to continue the thought or their speaking. The chat mat is just a catchy little tune or a catchy little phrase to help the students be more motivated to actually use these tools. You could see also that group of students that was playing the game, they were intermediate, grade 7 split class, and each one of them is required while they're playing or speaking that they had their chat mats or les pages de vocabulaire out in front of them. I hope that description helps. If not, I can continue to add more if that didn't help the chat mat question.
I think folks are comparing it to an anchor chart of some sort for personal use.
Yeah, our vocabulary pages, it's just it was a catchy phrase that I actually got from a primary teacher. They always come up with a lot of things, and we adapted it in the French class, even though it was English.
Okay, there's lots of answers coming in the chat. I see some folks saying the students are engaged. They are given airtime to speak in authentic ways. Someone is reinforcing how important it is to provide airtime in a language classroom. I see some folks sharing that there is high interest, everyone is engaged, and they have the opportunity to watch it being modeled and then give it a go.
Yes, and these games, these small group interactions are practiced. This is not day one where we got this speech from them. It was practiced and it was almost looked forward to in the classroom, the days where that they could play or use the objects. And it was to them, it was playing, and to us as educators, it was providing those opportunities to allow them to speak.
Okay. There's also a question here about La Chaise Chaude. Would that be a similar opportunity to speak on a daily basis as a classroom routine, or what would that look like in an FSL classroom?
So in our next slide, but we can stay here for a minute, in our chaise chaude, every class has une chaise, right? The students are sitting on them. And what we would do in our class called La Chaise Chaude is I would actually have a student created by them draw flames. So it looked like an actual fire, and we put La Chaise on fire just with a piece of tape and the paper, or the student would hold it themselves. And we would practice asking questions to that student. Comment ça va? Quelle est la date? Starting out with easy questions, and they were on the hot seat, La Chaise Chaude, where they would have to answer them. It would be led by the educator themselves first and modeled and repeated over and over. But as the year went on, what would happen would be I would remove myself and the students would create questions and ask them of their amis dans la classe to see how many questions they could ask and answer before the student didn't know how to answer a question. And we would play it in small groups, we would play it in large groups, and the students absolutely adored it. We even got a write-in too, because students had to pre-submit their questions that we had practiced also. So highly recommend, and I can even send a video of our little chaise chaude to include that for next time, or within the webinar at the end, we can add that. Very popular game for the kids.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, Kathy. Why don't we move on to the large group interactions, because I think that's it for questions and comments in the chat. So why don't we go there next?
No problem. So large group interactions, once again, provide our learners with multiple speaking opportunities and practice in their second language. For example, these large group interactions can be used as part of our daily routine. The daily routine can vary in the length of time depending on the activity, the routine, the age, the ability, the proficiency level, but the ultimate goal is having the learners communicate within the target language. With video here for our classroom routine, this is further on into the year where the educator, myself, have removed myself, and now the students are taking over for the classroom routine. So have a look and see what you think here.
tu as une sœur? Oui. J'ai une proposition. Est-ce que tu as une
Thank you. So that you can see the student prepared her start of day, and she had prepared questions where her classmates had to listen and respond to her. And we had given everybody a day. Many people back in the Google Doc from a few minutes ago had wrote Le Prof du jour, which again is something that needs to be modeled. And then the students then became the speakers ou Le Prof du jour. Very common thing to do. And this point we added in slides to add to it. Very wonderful way to get the students in the large group speaking in French. A second large group interaction that we would often do in our class is an interactive slide deck. And these slide decks were built by the students based on words they wanted to know and were motivated to learn and know. You can see they're all around the projector. Actually, they say all the words that pop up within the slide. And it's a constant battle to say, oh, this time we got 32 of the words, next time I hope to get 35. And in the end, in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's great, you're speaking more, and they just want to increase their number. And there's more than three, we have just highlighted here, three. A third large group example of a speaking interaction that provides multiple opportunities for students to speak are surveys. We even had coined le sondage de la semaine, where I would come up with a sondage pour la semaine, and one day, depending on what our school schedule was that week, we would do le sondage, where the students would go around and ask each other questions and listen for answers. But then as the year went on, la sondage de la semaine was assigned to a student. And they would create it, and then the students, everybody would use the sondage that student or learner had created and use it amongst all of them. The surveys provide learners with the opportunities to ask questions, listen for answers, record responses, and these quick, frequent dialogues with multiple learners promote FSL speaking within the classroom. So have a look at this example of a survey.
Oui, c'est bien. Oui, j'ai une question pour vous. Est-ce que tu aimes manger au restaurant? Oui.
And I do apologize for the background noise, but once again, that's what we do want in our classrooms is productive noise or our students speaking French noise. And I wanted to show you how engaged these learners are, even if the quality of video is not the best, but we've all been there and know what that wonderful sound sounds like when they're all speaking French. I just see in the chat there, what was the question? For this one, the student had, these students all live in the same town, and it was quel est votre restaurant préféré? And they would say the answer, and then est-ce que tu aimes manger? Which kind of food did you like eating at that restaurant? The students in this video, they're in grade 6 extended French. Any other question, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I can do my best to answer them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kathy.
No problem. There is, Erin, in the chat, there's a request to watch the interactive slide deck and the cootie catcher video.
Sure. Why don't we circle back? I think we're a little ahead of time, which never happens. So we have a moment to take a look at that video if there's interest. So let me head on back there. And the cootie catchers was the first request. So let's take a look at that one.
Bonjour. Quelle couleur? V-A-E-R-T. Animal. Toi. Un, deux, trois. Deux. Est-ce que tu as un chien à la maison? Non.
And you can see the question in the cookie catcher was the est-ce que tu as, and you can see in the background on the board, the question was est-ce que tu as. It was one that we had been practicing. This is in a core classroom that we had been practicing for weeks. So it was one that they knew very well. And I was going to remake this video without our students making the funny gestures like in the background, like, oh, I'm on camera. But once again, I needed to make it as authentic as possible because we always have those, the people that make us smile in our classrooms.
You see the excitement with the answer. Her face just lit up. That was incredible to see. The second example that was requested in the chat was the interactive slide deck. So let's take a look at that provocation and the interactions there.
And you can see in this video, and we did in the Mentimeter from the beginning of our presentation, notice there was a lot of core educators in this webinar this evening. This is a grade 8 core class that is videoed here, and they're one of our most challenging to promote their speaking. But this interactive slide deck was built by them, and they put their 5 favorite foods in Google, like just in pictures. And then the slide after was the word in French, and they could even include the phonetics of it. You could see some of them had it, les pommes de terre, and that was all created by them. And each group's goal was to try to get a number that was higher than the group before that. So the challenge was to beat their friends in the game, and it worked because they were speaking more French each time they tried the game. There is one student using the computer, but that student is also participating. If we were doing this as the full class, I always have a student coming up because it motivates them even more to just click through the different slides.
There's also a request about that slide in particular. Is there any way that les spectateurs ce soir can have access to that resource?
Of course, and I have it. It's actually a huge file that I share with almost every single one of the teachers in our school board has it, and they use it in core, they use it in immersion, they use it all the time, and they have almost battles between classes to, can you repeat what the goal was? So if I was doing the slideshow, I would say, like, you could see it was picture, word, and I would have the students keep saying it, like they'd say patat, le gluette, le thé vert, le saumon. And if it landed on, let's say, peanuts, but the class didn't know the French word for peanuts, that was their number. That's where they stopped because I had to assist them with the word. And let's say that was slide 24, where their game or their score for that day would be 24. So then the next day or the next time that we would play, they would hope that they would now know the word les arachides. So they would say that one and we'd be able to increase our score past 24. The students adore the game. And then you could even play it where they get to say arrête. So I would just keep my finger on the arrow. So all the slides are flashing to the learners. And when someone says arrête, if you wanted to promote more speaking, they'd have to put that word into a whole sentence, indicating their preference, if they like it, do they have it in their lunch that day? It works really, really well for them. And of course, I can share this one. This happens to be our food one, but through the years, we built les vêtements, les classes populaires, les nourritures. But the students actually have built these, and it means more to them because it's slides they created and images they chose to represent these foods, places, weather, whatever your topic is. How many kids are responding at once? You can do it as a full class where the whole class is speaking, or you could do it in that small group. That's one that can change, and they're easy to post on class websites or pages so that they can practice these words at home. Lots of students like to take them home and challenge their families to see which numbers they could get to. I hope I've answered the questions. Let me know if there are more.
Thank you so much for sharing all those awesome talk frames and spoken strategies. They're really incredible. In
No problem.
module 2, you'll notice that there is a section in both the video, the slide deck, and the viewer's guide that's dedicated to what we call innovative talk frames. So that's embedding technology in an innovative way to empower young people to speak, and so that they can really see some of their passions and interests in the type of learning that they're doing in the classroom. Among some of the talk frames that you'll see in that section are things like virtual reality, augmented reality, coding, and podcasting. And so this evening, we just wanted to highlight one of those innovative talk frames. Of course, if the other ones spark curiosity and you're wondering what they look like during the day-to-day activities of the classroom, then again, please head on over to the Module 2 webinar. So the advantages for podcasting for French language learners are really, really numerous. As you can expect, podcasting builds the connection between listening and speaking. It builds the connection between what they're comprehending as receptive language and what they're then able to produce in those authentic oral communications. Podcasting really hooks young people. They love to get behind the mic and share their story. And so in this way, it helps them to build their confidence. And of course, the output of that is that they develop a better understanding of the spoken language. On the screen, you're going to see 2 resources that you may find helpful if you're looking to do a deeper dive into podcasting. The first one here is an image with an augmented reality style overlay. And so what you'll see is that this is what we would call ThingLink. And using ThingLink, you'll notice if I popped into the ThingLink platform, these icons would actually appear. So where it says I, you would have the vocabulary for your various components of the podcasting equipment. Where you see the icon for a speaker, you would be able to see and hear an explanation and an overview about the podcast. And so I'm just going to show you what that looks like, because this is a resource that you might consider sharing with your students to help build vocabulary. So you'll notice once I'm in ThingLink, these icons, they actually blink to let me know that they're interactive. So I can click on the pop filter, and the word for pop filter is la bonnette, le micro, le pied de micro. I can listen.
Oui, vidéo. Oui, vidéo est un logiciel gratuit pour faire du montage.
To some information en français about the various types of editing platforms that students might use to take their raw footage, the raw recording, and polish it so that it is a produced piece of spoken production. When we click in the center, you'll see that there's some additional information and vocabulary building pieces. So kind of the flip side here is that we have a fun platform where you could use ThingLink to create interactive images, to add audio as voiceovers to images. You can make interactive tours where you're taking a map and you can travel from place to place and have students share about some of these spaces. So this is ThingLink, and as an aside, it's very useful for that augmented reality piece. But in this particular instance, what it does is it helps us to situate the vocabulary that is at the heart of podcasting. As part of the Fall Virtual Summit that just happened a couple weeks ago, a series of videos were released. And one of those videos was about leveraging podcasting in your French classroom. You'll see here that it is a video that is on YouTube, and I will pop the link in the chat if that's of interest to you. And it is a step-by-step tutorial on how you can leverage podcasting and help navigate the 3 phases to creating a podcast. So the pre-production phase, where students are thinking about the topic, the framework for their podcast, the kinds of questions, the way in which they're going to host their conversation. Then moving into production, which is the actual recording of the podcast and what that looks like if you're going to use a more professional setup like the one you see on the screen, or you're going to simply use a phone or a handheld device to grab that raw audio. And then finally, that post-production piece and how to get a quality podcast with sound effects and music and those fade in, fade outs that make podcasts so appealing as a polished product. So we could dedicate a good hour or more to podcasting, but I wanted to give a takeaway resource for you where you could dive deeper into the ideas of podcasting. And I'll just take a quick peek because I saw there were a couple things in the chat there. Kathy, did you see anything specific to podcasting?
No, they're still asking a few little questions about, they appreciate the podcasting information, the YouTube link, and there's a few questions about cootie catchers in French and the idea of starting to build sentences, vocabs, ideas of where you can go to help your students build instead of just vocabulary words, take those words and place into full sentences. So I believe thus far we're up to date in the chat.
Okay. All right. So let's take a moment then to reflect, and we invite you to think about the various strategies and models of learning that you've heard of this evening, that you've seen in that shared doc that we co-constructed together. And we'd like for you to reflect on the prompt that you see on the screen. I'm going to read it in a moment, but I wanted to let you know that we're going to try a strategy called the waterfall strategy. Waterfall strategy is that we're not going to immediately start typing our answer in the chat, but you're going to wait for me to count you down. And I'm going to say 3, 2, 1, waterfall. And when you hear the word waterfall, you are going to put your answers in the chat, and that helps the answers to come in like a waterfall. Okay, so don't put your answer in the chat just yet. I'm going to read the question, give you about 30 seconds of thinking time. When you hear waterfall, that's when we would love to see those answers come in the chat. All right, so here we go. How do you incorporate the linguistic identities and lived experiences of the learners in your French language classrooms within programming pathways and talk frames? How do you incorporate the linguistic identities and lived experiences of the learners in your classrooms within programming pathways and talk frames? 30 seconds of silence before you'll hear the word waterfall. All right, we're like the Matrix. This is a fast 30 seconds. 3, 2, 1, shoot the waterfall. I see music and pictures, encouraging learners to share about themselves and their families, asking students to introduce themselves in French using familiar structures like je viens du Canada, je viens de l'Inde, je parle. Talking about the weekend, talk frames like question du jour, using similarities between linguistic structures in English and French, birthday cards, talking to children in their languages, the language from the heart that perhaps they speak at home. Get to know them, use the language of the heart as well as English to make connections to French. Incorporate their interests and current topics like bubble tea, music, foods. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. And with that, we're going to spend just a little time speaking about assessment and how we can document evidence about speaking in the classroom. So back to you, Kathy.
Thank you. I like to incorporate the interest and specific shout out to bubble tea. That is a very popular item amongst a lot of our learners these days. When we do come to anything that we're doing with our students, we do need to think about the assessment and documentation for all of our learners. As our students are being provided with these multiple speaking opportunities, us as educators are consistently observing, recording, and assessing how our learners are doing. During an assessment, the educator is looking at the criteria to see how well the learner can meet the actual purpose of the task. You can see here on our slide, we outlined a task that was, I can ask and answer simple questions about myself. For the assessment, the documentation of evidence for this task, we've provided 4 methods in which you can assess and provide feedback to both yourself as an educator and your learners. The first one that we've chosen to highlight here to assess the task of I can ask and answer simple questions about myself is the single point rubric. The single point rubric is teacher driven, but also co-created by students using friendly language. The single point rubric is designed around the task that the students are working on. So you can see here, once again, I can ask and answer simple questions about myself. And underneath, within that single point rubric is the criteria. Does the student, the learner, know enough words to talk about him or herself? Can he or she use short phrases? And can they use them with fluency? So down the middle are the criteria to the task, whereas on either side, we can talk about the strong aspects and how you can strengthen your work. The students and I find parents are quite familiar with the single point rubric and do find it very user-friendly to use. The second method that you can use for assessment and documentation of evidence, in this case for speaking, are simply graphic organizers. And like the picture shows, graphic organizers can take on the form of many different shapes or sizes, can be digital, can be on paper. And once again, these graphic organizers can be used when the task is assigned at the start, and again, while during actually doing the task, to provide those students with the feedback they need to continue to be successful with this task. One of my favorite ways to assess and document evidence of our learners are simply those anecdotal notes. And I loved the image of simply the pen and paper. It's something I always find readily available to us. But these anecdotals can take the form of pen and paper, can take the form of a class list. I have class lists with our boxes beside it, but then I've also made class lists where the boxes for each student's name are quite large, where you can continually add to the box of how our students are doing. Or these anecdotals can also take form of digital. The last and fourth piece that we've chosen for us as educators to highlight learning and assessment of our students in our classroom is the learning map. And this learning map is definitely a wonderful tool that I learned about through the creation of this webinar, which puts the ownership on the learner. The educator and the learner can sit together while the learner is working on the task, and they can document their learning journey together that comes complete with feedback and next steps for improvement upon for their learning for the next task that would be assigned. So you can see the learning goals, the learning, and then sharing the learning together, which is one of the most valuable steps for a student to continue their learning. I'm just looking at the time. I don't think we have time for our breakout rooms, but I am going to continue on to the next slide about our questions and answers. And I do know that a lot of information has been provided and given over the last hour on a Wednesday evening. And at this point of our webinar, do you have any questions? And that's a big loaded question, but to help you reflect or think back to 7 o'clock, we've highlighted on here the outline of our webinar that maybe give you an idea, oh yeah, I had that question and then forgot about it, but do feel free to ask your questions either within the chat or simply by raising your hand. do.
So there's a question about access to the slide deck.
And I'm sure between Erin and Jordan and myself that we can get that slide deck shared with the participants of this webinar this evening. I have no problem sharing it with you. It's simply we converted it into a PowerPoint. So I can share that with you guys, the La Nourriture slide deck, and then feel free to take it and build so many more of your own. They're definitely invaluable, an invaluable tool that you can use all the time.
And I've just dropped the shortcut link. So there's a bit.ly in the chat. If you highlight that, it might ask you for the HTTPS / there. But if you head on over to bit.ly Weaving Strands 2 lowercase, that will give you access to this slide deck. And again, we invite you to visit the resources for the fulsome experience. We really just highlighted some of the things in our speaking module, but you can find the full gamut of resources in the video available on the OMLTA YouTube channel, in the viewer's guide, and in the module. And Jordan will remind you of where to get those pieces when she wraps up in just a moment. And there's a question in there. I've got super background for hot seat now, just in time for Halloween, which is amazing. And the modules, viewer's guide, and recording, as Jordan just shared, will be available at OMLTA. So with that, over to you, Jordan.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.